Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, July 26th, 2018, as I scramble to catch up with the various tasks that go along with turning on the microphones in the morning. Hi, how are you? It's time for another show, and luckily we have Greg Dworkin with us standing by, not quite yet on the phone, but already collecting a raft of stories to try and catch us up on where we are this morning, and it's hard to tell. So far, so good. No missiles flying as I look out the window, but it does look like a sunny day. Maybe it'll get a little bit warmer. We will stress the dying air conditioning system to the max, no doubt. So be on the lookout for frequent breaks for me to go and fiddle with things around the house to try and keep things cool. Nice day, though, even though the White House has declared it a bad weather day. A little bit of a morning journalism controversy to go along with yesterday's journalism controversy. And I guess the story goes that the president is on travel today. He's going, who cares, wherever he's going. And point is that they have declared it, I told you, a bad weather day. That makes a difference in that. As he takes off for, I guess, Joint Base Andrews to wing his way, I think, westward for his whirlwind media tour of the day. He'll be taking the car rather than the helicopter. You won't want to fly your helicopter in bad weather, quote-unquote bad weather. Of course, it's a beautiful sunny day, and there are reporters tweeting out shots outside of their office windows to show just how nice it looks. But the big difference in getting to Andrews, apparently by car versus going by helicopter, you don't have to walk across the South Lawn on your way to the helicopter, where reporters can gather and shout questions at the president. And I guess he's just not interested in answering any today. So who was it? Hallie Jackson, tweeting out the view from her White House area office window. She being the chief White House correspondent for NBC News, and White House correspondents running into trouble today. Last night's Twitter tantrum, I think it was last night, or last night's controversy anyway, much talked about on Twitter, revolved around the banning of a CNN White House reporter from a hastily called Rose Garden event yesterday, with some people believing that the president called it in order to distract attention from whatever else was going on, whatever other disaster was unfolding at the time, whatever dumpster was on fire. And the CNN reporter excluded from the event because, of course, they had been very, very rude and disrespectful, according to the White House, at some earlier point. That would include shouting questions to the president, which is, of course, what all White House reporters do. I don't know what else it's going to take to convince them that what they're covering it just isn't a White House, and they need to stop playing along as though this was a normal thing. But I don't know. We've told them 100 times what they should do about it, and it almost always includes the only suggestions people are able to come up with, and I don't really know what to tell them to do. It's probably a no-win situation, but the most frequently given advice is don't go anymore. Or if you really think something might happen at the White House and you need coverage, send the interns and let the senior reporters go elsewhere to find actual news. 'Cause it's not like Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to come out and tell you facts that are true and verifiable and printable. But, since that hasn't really been their mission lately, printing facts that are true and verifiable, but rather whatever they come out of this room in this house dressed in these suits and say, and then lament how untrue it is 3 days later in an opinion piece, it's hardly worth doing. But no one's boycotting. That's not happening. It doesn't seem to make any sense for people whose job it is to... the justification always being, well, when it gets said by the president or the president's staff, it's news even if it's a bunch of lies. And so far, no one's been able to dissuade them of that. And I understand the take that it's news, but I don't understand handing over the pages of the paper. But anyway, the reason this stuff happens, and I hate to blame the victims for these things, and I feel guilty about that, but I guess the reason this stuff happens is the White House, any White House, White Houses who've been in disputes before, not just Trump, and they know that they'll be back tomorrow, and so they are, tweeting about how they're lying again about the weather. But back they are, and so I can't imagine the Trump administration or any other administration learning any other lessons. So here we are. We learned it. We know what's going to happen. Let's round up what else has been happening. Besides, I forgot to mention, Trump has some complaints about their way they're running Twitter. I don't know what his complaint is based on. I assume some wingnut complained somewhere about a thing. He heard about it, and so he said it. It might have made it to Fox News' air. I don't know. I couldn't tell you that. I hope that's not what we have the news revolving around later today, because not only does it not matter, but I don't understand it, and I'm hoping not to. Greg must have something else. There are 39 messages waiting for me, so I'm going to scan through them with him. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. So we'll start at the bottom.
Right.
The White House correspondence thing is important, and I think it's interesting. As far as Trump's Twitter complaints about Twitter, I think it has to do with the fact that they eliminated millions of bots. So he probably lost about 50 million followers, and so did a lot of conservatives, and that's what he's complaining about.
Well,
Twitter is unfair about getting rid of conservative voices. Well, they're all bots.
Yeah. Well, so they're not really voices.
Well, they are, because they're his supporters.
Well, but that's just
and
a
some
voice.
of the prominent conservative supporters of him have also lost followers because they've banned the bots. So I think that's what he's complaining about.
Oh.
But this thing about the White House Correspondents Association closing ranks around the CNN report is kind of interesting. First of all, she's a Daily Caller alumna.
Oh, is that right?
So that helps to, it's like calling Rod Rosenstein a Democrat.
I guess
or Jim
so,
Comey. No.
Stupid liberal.
Yeah. But no. And one of the strongest voices that almost immediately came out and supported CNN was Fox News.
Well,
I think it tells you a little bit about what's going on. Jobs are more important than ideology. Brett Baer said that when President Obama's administration left us out of round-robin interviews, CNN and Jake Tapper spoke out for us. As a member of the White House press pool on the news side, this is what's supposed to happen. So both publicly and privately, Fox News are closing ranks with CNN about this. So I don't think it's going to stand. I don't think that they're going to be able to do stuff to really exclude reporters. Jay Rosen, of course, had the idea years ago that the best way for the press to respond to Sarah Huckabee lying about everything, Sanders, is to simply send the interns. Yeah. So that way you get it covered, but you don't have to send your best people.
I guess so. It's funny.
If you did that for one day, I think it would make a statement.
The reporters who get the White House assignment, I guess that's sort of the pinnacle of the reporting career, and I'm sure that they would be pushing back and say, well, I don't want to send an intern to do this job I have fought so hard to get, but
but for a day, maybe you do.
Yeah, it would be a nice.
It makes a statement.
Try. I think they should give it a
it's
shot.
like resigning from the White House. It's not like it's going to change everything, but boy, would it make a statement, because it never happens.
Yeah. I don't know what else to advise them to do. I have no other alternative.
Well, my advice also is not them, but us. If the best way that you could show support for the White House correspondents who cover, not necessarily cable, but even cable in a way, I suppose, if it's possible. But you should subscribe to their papers. Make sure they still have a job.
All right. Well, go do that. Or you do already. You over there listening in the other place. Think about it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in other news, by the way, let me just read a very brief statement from Olivier Knox, who's the White House Correspondents Association president. We strongly condemn the White House misguided and inappropriate decision today to bar one of our members from an open press event after she asked questions they didn't like. This type of retaliation is wholly inappropriate, wrong-headed, and weak. It cannot stand. Reporters asking questions of powerful government officials, up to and including the president, helps hold those people accountable. In our republic, the White House Correspondents Association supports the prerogative of all reporters to do their jobs without fear of reprisal from the government. That's about it, really. They're trying to intimidate the reporters. It's not going to work. If you ever saw them, they're pretty aggressive, and that's not going to change. And now the only thing is they're going to turn their questions to, okay, well, why did you do this?
I guess so. I mean, I imagine that will be top of mind for them.
Now, in other news, I think there's other important things we need to talk about. Just how many billions did you lose in after-hours trading yesterday?
Me, personally, 17.
I mean, how much did Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters lose?
Oh, the
Because
corporate entity.
Zuckerberg lost billions.
Yeah, I lost probably like $1,700 million.
You did.
I had it here somewhere, and I cannot find it now. If you find it, it is mine.
That's what happened to me. I had hundreds of millions of dollars, and now I can't find it. I lost it. Must have been an after-hours trading it.
Yes. So if you see it around, send it my way.
If I see it around, I'll definitely not tell you.
So okay.
So
what?
I really have no regret for Facebook, who I'm learning to hate.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't bother me that they lost fake money.
Look, I mean, if they're going to let InfoWars on and ignore the complaints and concerns of Sandy Hook parents, whatever happens to them happens. I don't really care.
I guess so. I'm with you on that. I'm frequently urged to give up Facebook. Personally, I don't use it for anything.
I don't use it for anything, and so I finally did give it up. I just closed my account.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Can you do that? Will they let you just?
I don't know. I just
left it there. Okay.
And they ask you why, and I don't know what happens. They're probably still trying to glean my data and sell it.
Oh, yeah. I still post the show's podcast on a Facebook page, and maybe I should take a look. Maybe nobody's looking at it, and it's not worth doing anymore. I don't know. It hasn't changed.
Anyway,
let's
talk about some polling.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch more polling out there, and I think that's all kind of interesting.
Okay.
So let's start with NPR PBS national surveys. This is from Marist. And they're asking, what do you think about the support for allowing Robert Mueller to finish his investigation? I think that people have been misled by previous polling that looks to see whether Mueller's popular or not. I think it's a stupid question. Do you think the cop in your neighborhood is popular? I don't know. I don't care. Is he doing his job? That's really what I care about. 60% of rank and file Republicans say let Mueller finish, compared to 23% who say he should be fired.
Oh. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of important. And despite the attacks on President Trump, Mark Meadows and assistant coach Jim Jordan, says Jeff Guerin, the public still says by 46 to 32, the Mueller investigation is fair. And there's a lot more from NPR PBS, including Trump's approval numbers, which actually are relatively low. They're under 40. And most people think that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. 69% did. And 57% think they're going to try again.
Well,
okay.
They will.
Yeah. Now, Democrats are poised for gains in the midterms, buoyed by big advantages among women with voter enthusiasm at their side. And one of the stories I have really is a Dave Hopkins piece. He's a political scientist about the invisible resistance, one of the undercovered stories of 2018. It's just how important that is. Okay. But in that regard, big advantages among women with voter enthusiasm on their side. When registered voters were asked which party's candidate they're likely to vote for come November, they favored Democrats over the GOP 47 to 40. That's up from a 5-point edge in April. Okay. Female voters say they prefer Democrats this fall by a 21-point margin.
All right.
Republicans win men by 9 points. Obviously, women are smarter than men. Negative opinions of Trump are pronounced among women. Trump's job approvals remain relatively static at 39. Approval 51, but there's a staggering 43-point gender gap, with 62% of the women disapproving of Trump's job and half of men approving of his performance. And 57% of suburban women also strongly disapprove of Trump. Don't forget, they're the soccer moms of this election. And Democrat, as well as people who hate both parties. And Democrats have a 28-point edge in which party suburban women would vote for in November. It's an ominous sign for Republicans, given that these are the critical voters in many House battlefields.
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
You would be hard-pressed to find a president who has more sharply divided the nation along gender lines, said Lee Miringoff, director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion. It remains to be seen what role this may play in the midterm elections. Well, frankly, women are running, and women are managing those candidacies. And when they run against men, at least in the Democratic primary, they tend to win. So we'll see.
Yes. All right. Go ahead,
Now,
women.
the party base, Trump is stronger than ever. 62% of Republicans strongly approve. That doesn't matter. It doesn't erase the hotly negative view of him with everybody else. And the fact of the matter is, until this year, I think Nate Silver pointed out, nobody really cared about what your own people thought about you. That was like a given. Now, all of a sudden, that's the hot thing. Well, Trump's base will never support him. Well, so what? The question really is what independents think, and that doesn't get covered nearly enough. Now, Kaiser also had a tracking poll out, and
The Kaiser.
Kaiser Family Foundation.
Oh, I see. All right.
And the numbers there have to do with making clear that the number one issue for voters is whether or not you're going to take away pre-existing conditions and other protections for health care. That's the number one issue that people care about. And they're most likely to vote for their representative based on whether or not they think that's going to happen, which is interesting because the Trump administration is making noises right now about changing the rules to take away pre-existing conditions, which is really dumb.
I mean, I'm against.
Yeah. Now, if November's election for Congress is held today, which party's candidate are you more likely to vote for in your district based on those who are registered to vote from the Kaiser Foundation Health Tracking Poll? And right now the number is Democrat 49, Republican 37. That's a 12-point generic lead. And that's consistent with everything else we've seen. We had Quinnipiac yesterday. We had National Marist that I'm telling you about, as well as the Kaiser Family Foundation today. And all of those, are boding quite well. Quinnipiac and Marist both have Trump under 40, and they both have leads for the generic ballot for the Democrats. So, the Democrats look to be in pretty good shape for the House. Now, more polling that was released yesterday was from NBC Marist. Mark Murray sums that up. Trump job rating in Minnesota, 36%, in Michigan 36%, Minnesota 38%, Wisconsin 36%. They polled those three states. Congressional preference in those polls: in Michigan, Democrat plus 9, Minnesota, Democrat plus 12, and Wisconsin, Democrat plus 8. What's your 2018 vote message? In Michigan, 53% check and balance, 33% support Trump. Minnesota, 55-35, and Wisconsin, 54 check and balance, 36% support Trump. And then finally, does Trump deserve re-election in 2020? Michigan, 28% say yes, Minnesota, 30% say yes, and Wisconsin, 31% say yes. In all three of those states, 60 to 63% say no.
All right.
Pretty bad numbers for the Republicans, and they match the other bad numbers for Republicans that we were talking about as well. I took a look at the civics data that we have access to, and I was looking only really, I don't care about Trump supporters. I'm looking at independents. And the independents in the generic ballot, support is growing for the Democrats. It's 43-38 right now. It was tied, and now it's 43-38. And for Trump support, Donald Trump's job approval, it's 55 disapprove, 40 approve, and this is independents, and that was growing. It's been growing since actually the Kavanaugh nomination, which is not proven to be particularly popular.
Okay.
Right, and a lot of that has to do with Roe v. Wade. That's another thing that the Kaiser Foundation poll looked at, and most Americans are opposed to changing the legality of available abortion.
All right.
Of how they. So, in summary, you look at all the polls, and actually the Democrats are in pretty good position.
I'm glad to hear it. When are we going to have this election again? I feel like we're
until November, but I think it's important to do that because the counter narrative you hear a lot from the media, and they have to get better about not doing this. Is but his base isn't deserting him. It doesn't matter if his base isn't deserting him. Everybody else is deserting him.
Right. Well, okay. They got. What sort of business would you have to go to find people who are deserting Trump? It's not. They're not in diners or bars, bowling alleys. I don't know.
Well, you could talk to the farmers. And the farmers in the
they're getting
Midwest
$12
is a lot
billion.
of the reason why those poll numbers are looking not that good, because the whole trade tariff thing is not working out especially well.
Well, soon there will be.
Points out right after that trio of polls in the Midwest came out from NBC Marist, Weigel said, trade wars are easy to win.
Yes, right. Because they're simple. And all you got to do is tell them you'll get your $12 billion back.
Right. So why is all this happening? Let's look at this Dave Hopkins piece from Honest Graft, his
let's see,
political blog. Is the resistance the most undercovered political story of 2018?
Really?
The campaign money flowing on the Democratic side this year is just one sign of a larger mobilization of Americans' move to political action in response to current events. As Dave Wasserman of the Cook Report quipped, Donald Trump is the best fundraiser the Democrat candidates have ever had. Reports from journalists and academics describe grassroots organizational activity by left-of-center citizens and groups that is unequaled since Barack Obama's first presidential campaign, and disproportionate political engagement among women that may have been last matched during the push for the Equal Rights Amendment decades ago. Yet, even as the conventional wisdom continues to tilt toward the expectation of major Democratic electoral gains this year, some important micro-foundations underlying the national shift, the changing behavior of citizen activists and local communities, are receiving a small fraction of the media coverage that was directed to the Tea Party in 2010.
Well, that's true.
One obvious potential explanation for this relative inattention is that Trump himself dominates the daily news to an unparalleled degree, crowding out other stories about other topics. It's actually quite easy for the media to become fascinated with Democratic Party politics, even in the age of uniquely attention-grabbing Republican chief executives, at least under the right circumstances. For example, when a previously unknown challenger won an upset primary election victory over a mid-ranking member of the House leadership last month,
God. Armageddon.
She immediately became a media phenomenon.
Yes.
But Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez has gained so much attention precisely because she seems like a dramatic exception to the usual pattern. Preoccupation with novelty is an understandable human response, but when translated into journalistic practice, it results in a hurricane of national coverage descending on a single decidedly atypical congressional candidate. So the Democratic Party, he argues, is evolving. But we're left instead with a picture of millions of Americans arrayed from the political left to the center, disproportionately well-educated, suburban, and professional, the very ones who the Kaiser poll, I think it was, pointed out are especially hostile to Trump, who are simultaneously captivated and repulsed by the day-to-day behavior of Trump. And the real reason reporters and editors don't find that story more interesting is they feel they already know it. But if the balance of partisan power shifts in November, it won't just be because of Trump himself. It'll reflect the actions of citizens who responded to his presidency by making room in their own lives for heightened engagement in the political arena. Now, people on Twitter have pointed out another reason you don't see it as much is a lot of it is invisible, not just indivisible, but invisible, because they're using closed Facebook groups or other things that are offline and not really spending a whole lot of time talking about and publicizing themselves. And, of course, the Republicans refuse to hold another reason, Republicans refuse to hold town halls so you don't get the video that Abel loves to cover because the Republicans are avoiding it.
That's true. It's a good tactic on their part. They just don't provide the platform for their favorite kind of footage.
So I think all of that's important. And again, it's worth remembering a lot of these are fueled by women. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I heard Chuck Todd the other day talking about the fact, when the focus is on Russia, it's bad for Trump. But I feel like it's actually giving him a little break when people start to focus on Michael Cohen and the tapes and so on and so forth, which I think was a pretty dumb comment for a variety of reasons. Now, people have different reasons for disliking Trump, and there's nothing wrong with playing to all of them. That's how you get a Big Ten. You get everybody to dislike him because you give everybody a different reason.
Yes, that works.
Reason for Kavanaugh. That's why I think it's important that Kavanaugh does not look with respect on the Nixon tape decision by the Supreme Court to hand over material. You want to oppose him on Roe v. Wade, that's fine. That other guy over there is going to oppose him based on his views of the Nixon Supreme Court decision. I don't really care why you oppose him. If you want other reasons, that's cool. Go ahead and do that. So if you want other reasons to oppose Trump, that's fine. But I think that the main thing that the reminders about Karen McDougal, and by the way, Michael Avenetti's on Twitter today saying there's other women, there's other pregnancies, there's other payoffs. We need to know everything. The thing is that sort of thing does, in fact, galvanize women. It may not change their vote because they're already against it. But if you get them even more disgusted and more riled up and more angered, that's who shows up in November. So downplaying it because it doesn't fit in with your preferred narrative, that it's policy that has to defeat a president, not personal behavior. Well, depends who you are.
Interesting. Yeah, you said that, and then it's like it strikes me all of a sudden thinking about the Clinton years. I'm sorry, when was that the preferred narrative of the media?
Exactly right.
What are you talking about?
So it's bizarre, but they have their own games they like to play, and I think that looking at that whole thing that Dave Hopkins is talking about the invisible resistance, is really important in putting it all together in perspective.
Invisible, like F-35s.
Yeah, you can't even see it.
Right.
Now, after the break, I want to talk to you a little bit about House policy and process, because we got impeachment to talk about.
Yes, sort of. Stealth impeachment. Invisible impeachment.
Invisible impeachment.
You won't be able to see
it. PR impeachment, I guess we should call it.
Yeah, that's there'll be there's a story developing about that. There's not much to it on the back end, but that's fine. That makes it good for a little radio bite. And preferred narratives is something I'll probably come back to later in the show too. It happens all the time, and we're surrounded by it, and it's weird, and we can't seem to do anything about it. It must be a natural condition for us. All right, thanks, Greg. Let's hang on then for the other side of the break to get back to the more complicated stuff. Procedure in Congress when we return.
Right. Exactly.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show. Some kind of show. The point is, welcome back. The music has ended, and now we have to talk. That's really what this is all about. By the way, I mentioned this to Greg during the break. I've got one comment from our listener friend, Mighty OCD. Listening live today. He's very often a podcast listener later in the day, but
thanks for listening.
Yes, and thanks for chiming in to say Greg is wrong. You're not.
Oh yeah, Amanda's not here,
right. So someone absolutely has to do it. A New York Magazine article that purports to clear up exactly what it is that Trump is crying about on Twitter. Not so much that they are losing bots. But whatever it is, isn't happening. That's the contention of the of the article. Trump's complaint is that they're shadow banning, whatever that means, Republicans on Twitter. The headline of this piece by Brian Feldman in New York Magazine is "Twitter is not shadow banning Republicans." So it's written entirely in narrator voice, I guess.
Yeah, I think I saw the tweet complaining about conservatives. I didn't specifically say about Republicans.
I guess the deal is, the concept of the shadow ban, and it's enclosed in scare quotes, I guess it may not be a thing, has existed practically since the inception of the web forum. That is to say, even before Twitter. The idea is simple. That's good, because we don't have a lot of time for it. Instead of banning a user outright and informing them of such punishment, a shadow ban makes a user's post visible, but only to themselves. In other words, they think that they're still part of the community. They think
that they're talking and nobody can see it.
Right. I use the mute button for that. It doesn't mean that the other people don't see the person. It just means that I don't. And so there are a lot of people out there who I think spend a significant portion of their day yelling at me. I just don't know it.
That's a great idea. Has Trump been shadow banned?
It is. I doubt that he thinks he has. I think he thinks
because he breaks all the rules that Twitter purports to have about civility and violence.
And telling people you're going to kill them with nuclear weapons or things like that. I guess they don't believe him. That's a possibility. But yeah, I guess so. The concept is that you would do this on a large scale, and I guess they're thinking, oh, people aren't responding to conservative ideas and saying, that's awesome, I support you, very often. So it must be
because the bots are gone.
That's true. So I think that I'm certain that there is that the absence of the bots whose job it is to say that's an awesome idea and I support you has contributed to their feeling that there aren't as many people supporting their babbling as usual, and so I guess that then develops, even if you get even more paranoid, you say maybe there's nobody there, man, and so I'm
home right now. I'm on my computer. I'm working really hard to try to care about this topic, and just not happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole article, and I'm sure the guy deserved to get paid and everything. I'm just not going to read it now, but I guess the word is it's some other form of
sending it in. That's an important.
I don't know if he believes you. Okay, all right. Next up, I don't know.
I'd rather him be complaining about that than doing bad things for the country. So there's something to be said about that.
Sure.
So let's talk about Mark Meadows.
That guy.
And his little red folder, as Rachel Bate calls it.
Oh.
He filed articles of impeachment against Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein on the House floor. And interestingly, he only got 11 people to sign on to it.
Yes.
That's
early.
number one. And number two, it was not, and this is where you come in, you get to explain this to us. Conservatives chose not to file this as a privilege resolution. That means they don't get to force a vote on the House floor. And Rachel Bates says this avoids the GOP civil war that would take place if they did try, because Republicans are very divided on the matter. And presumably, if it's not a privileged resolution, this is the situation where if anybody actually does complain that they want it to be voted on, Paul Ryan gets to say, okay, you're right, it's really important, let's move it to committee.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially a direct resolution proposing the impeachment of a federal official is ordinarily a very highly privileged resolution. If any rank and file member of either party files it, they are entitled to ask for a ruling on whether or not it deserves this privilege. And if it does, there has to be a 1-hour debate at some point pretty much during the next 24 hours or so. They have a little bit of discretion about timing the thing. If, of course, if a party leader, the majority or minority leader, offer it on the floor, it's to be considered immediately. So they certainly could have gone that route, but I guess they don't have the majority leader's support for this thing, and I guess they don't have anybody's because they have 11 people. So essentially, they filed it. It's there. It may eventually be referred to a committee, and then the committee will simply opt not to do anything with it. Some of you who may have been around a little bit longer might remember when Dennis Kucinich did this with a proposal to impeach Dick Cheney, who actually, sucked and deserved.
I don't even remember that.
You don't remember that he did it, and he got himself that hour of floor time and forced if you count C-SPAN as national television, nationally televised 1-hour debate over the impeachment or the proposed impeachment of Dick Cheney. He was, of course, roundly ridiculed by the press for it. And it's pointless, etc. So it remains to be seen whether they will be as derisive about this one as about Kucinich's, which granted went nowhere, but it was about somebody who actually deserved impeachment.
So presumably, the 11 people, I don't know all the names, but I presume it's Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows and the other members of the House Treason Caucus?
Yes, and probably the doctor from the Ohio State wrestling team.
Well, he's deceased, so he gets 2 votes.
Doesn't matter. Like Chicago, they're all co-sponsoring everything.
Right, he gets 2 because, who's going to complain? He's not.
Right, he's got nothing to say. Yeah, I don't know who they are. We could look it up. It'll be available online probably by some point.
So the question on the table is why they're doing this. It's obviously not going to come to a vote. Are they supplying Trump with an excuse? Are they trying to distract from Trump's terrible poll numbers and the ongoing, continuing blowback from the Helsinki mess that Trump got himself into? It's notable that yesterday a whole lot of stuff was flying in terms of trying to walk this last week back. Mike Pompeo was testifying on the Hill, trying to claim that everything's under control, and he has a pretty good idea of what Trump talked about, and he's on board with everything, and it's not as bad as it looks. They had a meeting with the European representative for trade, which basically said they agreed for further talks, and they're not going to be imposing any further tariffs, which made Wall Street a little happier. They said that, okay, well, Putin's not coming for any meeting right before the elections, which, by the way, might have terrible impact on Republicans. So things were looking like a lot of walkbacks and cleanup were being done. The guy with the broom that comes after the elephant parade. And then this impeachment thing gets put in Congress, and that's what people are talking about instead. And so, what benefit was that? That was kind of dumb. They were stepping on their own message there.
I guess so. I don't know what I'm not certain what they thought they were doing with it. I saw some speculation that Trump behind the scenes was pushing and said somebody should file it, and maybe he has a long-term plan insofar as he ever
he
has
has no
any.
long-term plans. We know that. But I could easily see, for whatever reason, Trump's giving us a hard time, and he says we have to do this because we're not supportive enough. So let's just do it. What the heck?
Yeah.
It's not going to hurt us. Yeah, it's going to really hurt all of those suburban mid swing districts that exactly who we need to do to keep the House. It's going to hurt there, but that's not our problem. In our districts, we're fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know exactly what or if they think they're going to get anything or not, or they just thought they were doing a favor for the president. And, it may very well be that he said, I know it's not going to go anywhere. I just want somebody to do it. I might use it for something to talk about later. So they did it. But to what end, I have no idea.
So in my few minutes that we have remaining on my segment, I want to talk a little bit about something else that Trump was threatening to do. This is a piece from The Atlantic by Elliot Cohen. Pulling security clearances is just the start. Another norm falls victim to Trump as he turns the power of government against his critics. This is all of a piece with booting out the CNN reporter. Basically, Trump is really getting to be even more thin-skinned than usual. And if you criticize him, he's going to try to retaliate. I mean, this is Richard Nixon's enemies list, except he's doing it all in public. And by the way, I thought it was an interesting observation that somebody made, that when media covers things, they not only want novelty, they want the thrill of discovering something. So if you discover secretly that the Trump administration is doing X, it gets big play. But if Trump administration does the exact same thing and does it right out open in the public, like yawn, nobody covers it. Even though the thing is just as terrible. But somehow doing it in open, discussion, like, dividing immigrant families. They announced that months ago before they did it.
Yeah.
And nobody blinked. And then they did it, and it's, oh my God, look what they're doing. But they told you they were going to do that. We said it was terrible, and they told you, and you said, yeah, you're on big story. And now all of a sudden they got images, and they got pictures, and they got videos, and it's a huge big story. And good, and it's not going away, and good. This thing needs to be covered. But they were all into the novelty of it, as opposed to just doing it right there in public. So one of the things that Trump is doing right there in public is threatening his enemies. And that really needs to be covered a lot more vigorously than it's being covered right now. Maybe if he also threatens the reporters, that'll wake him up to do that. But the week prior to that, he was threatening to pull security clearance on people who didn't even have it if he thought that they were critical of him. But not Mike Flynn.
No. All right. It's
I mean, it's a two-part thing I'm getting at here.
Yeah.
One is what they're doing, and the other is how it gets covered, how stuff gets covered. And, it's ridiculous that if you do something really bad, but you do it mundanely, routinely, this is why we're always talking about Nazis. The banal evil, the technocrat, approach to doing evil things is boring, and it just doesn't get the coverage and play in media that it deserves.
That is true. That's not if it's not what they call a sexy story.
Yeah. And that's, Michael Cohen. Let's everybody look at Michael Cohen. Fine. There's reasons to look at Michael Cohen. And, there's I'm not a lawyer, but there's a whole bunch of lawyers who think that, cover-ups and election law, finance law, colluding and conspiracy to conceal is important. And, of course, if you're trying to conceal these things, the media is all over it. But if you do this stuff right in public, like pulling people's security clearance because they're an enemy of yours, that is not as sexy, but I think it deserves a tremendous amount of attention.
Sounds pretty good. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like you say, maybe it's one of those things that they have gotten used to the idea that Trump rages about things, but there's only, 30% chance that something will happen as a result.
But, to me, that's part of normalization and something to be avoided and decried. Now, this story from Elliot Cohen, it will not be surprising if in the next few weeks, Sarah Huckabee Sanders says the president never had the intention of pulling the security clearances. With the deadpan mendacity that she has raised from a mere survival skill in this White House to an art form, she will insist it was all a hoax planted by the Amazon-driven Washington Post. But even if, as is often the case, Trump backs down when confronted with serious resistance, and that's important, that's why you have to resist, and that's why negative news stories are so important. Those threats will have told us some things worth knowing. The first and least consequential has to do with the psyche of a president who does not understand what motivates those who retain their tickets in the argot of the establishment. Sometimes the clearances help ease the way back into government service, but these kinds of security clearances are not particularly lucrative for people who have had the top jobs. That's not why they maintain them, but Trump probably has no idea that that's the case. The more worrisome thing here is that this episode points in the direction of more norms being dismantled temporarily, one hopes. Sanders did not dismiss out of hand the idea of handing over a former ambassador to the Russians. Right. Jeff Sessions thinks it's acceptable for the country's chief law enforcement to join shouts of lock her up, even in amusement. I added that because he was laughing at it. He wasn't joining it. So, too, will others in Trump's circle edge into territory unthinkable a few years ago. And Republicans who would have howled in fury if the Obama administration had attempted any similar outrages studiously look the other way in the cowardly silence that will ruin their party and what remains of their characters. All this while former Trump officials hold their tongues out of some twisted notion of loyalty or the mere fear of a public tongue lashing. And so on the one hand, nobody wants partisanship that takes no prisoners when parties exchange office, but that's not a normal time. And unfortunately, the Republican Party is no longer a normal party, but is in the compliant and spineless possession of a political buccaneer. It's actually more like a buck an hour. It may not be entirely improper to teach the lesson that if you sign up with an administration so utterly lacking in decency, so contemptuous of historical norms of bipartisanship and national security, so lacking in consideration for critics and defeated opponents, you're not going to be treated with the respect normally accorded to senior members of the loyal opposition. The men and women in the shadows who, for the sake of a corner office and an official car and a high title, have held their tongues and dishonored their principles, might want to think about that when Sanders tells her next lie. That's how he finishes. Sure. And lying, really, again, as we said the other day on the show, is the main thing to me that comes out of the Michael Cohen tapes. Trump claimed that he knew nothing about this stuff, and there he is making deals about how to deal with this stuff. So obviously he did know.
Yes. He was aware of something. It's hard to say when he knows things. But he was there and he was talking about it. At that moment, he was aware of the existence of it. He denies that he had any awareness of it. But we're not asking you about, how much you understood. Just were you there and you heard this? Yes? Okay. Good.
To me,
that's all.
If you want to take one thing that tells you everything you need to know about Trump.
Yes, I would like that. Thank you.
And it sounds like a real small thing. It's that he used his foundation to pay the $7 fee for the Boy Scouts for his kid.
That's true. What brought that to mind?
I don't know. It's just like, well, what do you expect from somebody? Look what he did.
That's true. That is a multifaceted issue right there.
That right there just wraps up everything you need to know about Donald Trump.
It's $7. He wouldn't do it out of pocket. It's to the Boy Scouts. He wouldn't do it.
And he made the foundation pay it, which of course is illegal. But that's another story.
So you're lying to right off the bat. You're a problem scout.
Yep. Something about truth, and
I know
honor.
that there's something.
Isn't that something about the Boy Scouts?
They have a whole list of things. They recite it every day. Yes.
Yep. Okay. Anyway, my last story before I leave here is from Max Boot. Always enjoy reading him. The evidence doesn't prove collusion, but it sure suggests it. So just keep in mind this whole thing. A lot of these are sideshows. The Michael Cohen stuff is a sideshow. And, what he does with tariffs is important to people in the Midwest, especially important if you're a farmer. But none of that is going to, change the fact that Mueller's closing in on him. And the next set of indictments are going to be Americans, and some of them might be very high up, not only in the Trump campaign, but in the Trump family.
Yes. And, of course, the trial of one of those Americans is set to begin pretty soon, even though...
It's next week. It was going to be this week, but they delayed it because I'm not sure why.
Right. Bad weather, apparently. Who knows what the
I need a list of the witnesses, I think they said.
Yes, right. A public disclosure of the list of witnesses. Although I don't know if that would be enough to delay it. I'm sure there were plenty of
they did delay it a long time. Okay,
no.
Fine. You want to delay, good. You get a week.
Okay. So I guess that's the deal. All right. Well, they need more lawyers reporting on this stuff. Someone can help Max Boot out on this one.
And Donald Trump Jr. and Roger Stone need more lawyers. Period.
Yes, that's true. But there are none left. They are all
used up.
Yeah. Those guys were always the ones who said, "Let's kill all the lawyers too." Now they need them.
Yeah, something like that. All right, so that's my summary for today. Not as much finesse-manship as yesterday, but, still.
Yes.
There's a lot going on, and, some of the boring stuff is actually the more important stuff. Some of the salacious, interesting stuff is good for, a couple of minutes of musing, but really doesn't change the arc of where things are going. And with that, I will see what develops between now and Monday. We'll be back Monday, and we'll do it again.
All right, very good. We'll have lots to talk about, I'm sure. Thanks, Greg, and a great collection of stories. I will fill in some of the details now that we've gotten this summary of stories out of it. And then we have a starting point for all this. So, by the way, for those of you was anybody ever interested in finding out who were the co-sponsors of the impeachment resolution who either opted not to or couldn't figure out that an immediate debate on the question was available to them? It doesn't resolve the issue, by the way. I guess. All right. Well, first I'll tell you who they were. So we know that Mark Meadows was the lead sponsor of it. The original co-sponsors, as they call them. There's a difference, a gradation of co-sponsorship. If you're an original co-sponsor, they always feel like they need to denote who are the original co-sponsors. These would be considered people who were signed on to the legislation right from the very beginning, the day of introduction, which, I don't really know why we keep track of these things, but we do. But I guess it's supposed to mean that you're talking about this is an OG here, somebody who really believed in this bill. Versus somebody who becomes convinced of it at some later date, whether, I don't know whether that's supposed to imply like a lobbyist got to you or you're jumping on the bandwagon or what, but for some reason they track this meticulously. So the original co-sponsors, because there's been no time to get new co-sponsors, that will happen today, and we'll see if anybody else signs on, were, as you know, Jim Jordan, who really should be, facing expulsion rather than worrying about impeaching anybody else, but that's neither here nor there. Representative Jody B. Hice, H-I-C-E, I don't know how you pronounce that, Republican of Georgia. Jeff Duncan from South Carolina, all Republicans, obviously. I think it's pretty plain. Andy Biggs of Arizona. Louis Gohmert, purported to be the dumbest member of Congress at the moment. Also, Republican of Texas. Matt Gaetz, that guy who's a very mouthy Floridian Republican who loves controversy, loves to get mixed up in this kind of stuff and duke it out with people. He looks like an idiot when he does, but he loves to do it. Scott DesJarlais, who's, the probably, I would guess, maybe the most personal scandal-tarred remaining member of the Republican conference. He seems like, I guess he just continues to survive his mistress and abortion controversy forever, or, hopefully, it all comes to an end at some point soon, but that's happening, so he's got nothing to lose. Paul Gosar of Arizona, let's see, Bill Posey from Florida, and finally Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania. That rounds out that's 10 original co-sponsors plus Meadows, 11 names signed on to this thing. We'll see whether anybody adds their name to it today. I mean, that information will be available. We probably will never look back and see this thing ever again. We could spend one more minute or so on the procedure surrounding it. Not only did they not avail themselves of, we know the fact that they didn't avail themselves of the immediate or relatively immediate debate that could have been made available to them. But you should, just to get a fuller picture of what they passed up and maybe understand why they did pass it up. Just because you are entitled to an hour of floor debate on the impeachment resolution, doesn't mean you're ever going to get a vote on impeachment itself. That's a long way away. Even if the thing were overwhelmingly popular, it would still be some time away. But more than likely, the only thing that happens with it is that there's, you spend your hour on the debate, and it's not even entirely clear that anybody would show up to debate them on it, except perhaps to claim some floor time and get some TV footage saying that it's stupid and they disagree, unless somebody if somebody wanted to be a co-sponsor, they could show up and say that they're so proud of these 11 patriots or what have you. But at the end of the hour, the question pending, whether there's unanimous support for the impeachment resolution or is none or something in between, the question that's pending at the end of the hour is, what should we do with this resolution? And one option would be, let's adopt it. Someone could put that question, but unlikely to happen. And what usually happens here is somebody with significant seniority, so that they are preferred for recognition by the speaker or acting speaker, or if they are debating it in the committee of the whole House. And I don't think they'd be dealing with it in committee at this point. But anyway, if you get recognized to speak, you can make the motion of how to dispose of this thing. And if the leadership opposes it, they'll send someone high-ranking enough to get recognized to then refer the resolution to committee. Or sometimes they'll just directly table the resolution and try and kill it that way. More often than not, the less controversial way of doing it, in case you're unsure about the popularity of a resolution like that, is you refer it to committee and make it the committee chairman's problem to decide what to do with it. So they would get up and have a vote to refer the thing to committee, and then it would be sent to committee. And I imagine that they would be able to get a majority behind a relatively benign sounding resolution like sending it to committee, and then the committee would just never take it up. And that would be the end of it. So there would be an hour debate, a vote, probably a sizable majority of people voting to send it to committee. Even a bunch of Democrats would probably vote to send it to committee just because they think it would make a headache for the committee. Some Democrats would vote not to even bother, so that it would just die a death in the hopper, just sit there and not go anywhere. But most likely it would get referred to committee, and the committee will never touch it again. If later on, if there was rising support for the idea of impeaching Rod Rosenstein, I guess then we say Rod Rosenstein these days, the committee could take it up and then have hearings or something, but they're not obligated to have hearings. They're not obligated to do anything with the bill. So that's a resolution. That's what would likely happen to it, even had they demanded privileged consideration for it. So on the one hand, it speaks to their non-seriousness by not even asking for the debate. On the other hand, maybe it doesn't say that much at all, after all, I guess, about their non-seriousness, you could argue. If you thought this crew had a brain cell between them and a real understanding of what was likely to happen, you might conclude, well, they know, they can see the writing on the wall. It would be a pointless resolution in the sense, not the resolution itself. That is pointless, but I mean the resolution of what to do with the resolution would be pointless. It would end up getting referred to committee, and why bother spending the hour if you can just go and do a media tour and hand out press releases about how you're trying to impeach him, and then get interviewed about why exactly are you interested in doing this, and then you can spend the time on TV bashing Rod Rosenstein instead of actually spending your time on the floor getting nothing in particular done. So hopefully that adds a little bit to your understanding of why they did things the way they did it, and what they may or may not have been giving up in deciding not to pursue a privileged resolution rather than simply introducing this thing and seeing what happens. All right. Well, we are up against yet another break, and so this is a good time then to jump off of this topic and make a tour in the second hour around the various stories that developed yesterday. And I know I've got at least one socked away that I think will be of some interest. There was a very strange little flap going on yesterday that I can't really explain other than by guessing that it's just something that was manufactured by the journalists at BuzzFeed. Not that it was untrue or involved facts that didn't happen, but rather I think they were pushing for a certain narrative. It was a quick piece that crossed the screen just briefly of the Democratic, I think he's the caucus chairman now, James Clymer of South Carolina, taking what looked to be a pot shot at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'd like to talk about that one. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I got that one out correctly. And let's see. By way of segue, we were talking before the break about just sort of a generalized lack of understanding by who knows who, a little bit of everybody. Although the press did very well yesterday, I must say. The congressional press did a great job of pointing out very quickly that the impeachment resolution wasn't introduced as a privileged resolution and what that meant. And I thought did a pretty good job of it, and only the boring details were left for me to explain to you. I guess this next story, I think, also exhibited a little bit of a lack of understanding of how things actually tend to go on Capitol Hill, but I'm not certain that it was a purposeful misunderstanding, but I think things spiraled out of control pretty quickly. This didn't get a great deal of attention, and I don't know, maybe doesn't deserve this much time, but I thought it offered a nice place to possibly settle nerves on both sides of what is purported to be a Dems in disarray divide, as between, I don't know what, Bernie supporting Democrats and now, I guess, not only non-Bernie supporting, but Bernie hating Democrats as well. And, you know, this is a point of contention that persists inside of the party, and I think left alone or fanned, these flames could spread, and hopefully it just wasn't that interesting enough of a story. It didn't really grab hold, and there's so much happening and so many things about which we all agree with respect to getting rid of, or minimizing the impact of the Trump so-called administration, that this was just a minor speed bump. But this one caught my eye. The headline did, anyway, right? A top Democrat says Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would need to wait her turn for leadership. Now, this is a write-up, pardon me, by Lysandra Villa, a BuzzFeed news reporter, based on an exchange that took place in I don't know what they call it. is it a video podcast that BuzzFeed News does? Live from the District, a regular feature that they have, in which I guess it looks like the BuzzFeed News boss man, what's his name, Ben Smith, and I only remember his name because he's the bigwig who started BuzzFeed News, and I don't know who the co-host or maybe the actual host is. I've not watched this show, but I've heard from a couple of people who do, and they say it's a pretty reasonably high quality program, actually. But they interviewed Jim Clymer about a number of things, only one of which had anything to do with, and only tangentially, with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it's somewhat telling that, I guess, the only write-up I saw of it, maybe this is unfair, maybe there were 3 more write-ups about the various other topics that Jim Clyburn commented on, and I only saw this one. But this one, I think, it's almost as if BuzzFeed intentionally fanned the flames of the divisions here in order to create more interest in the story. It worked for me, except that I spent the rest of the day trying to tamp down on those flames. The subheader here is South Carolina Rep. Jim Clyburn sent a warning shot. That's the phrase used. Sent a warning shot Wednesday toward the likely incoming freshman who beat one of Clyburn's fellow members of House leadership in a primary. So it sets up with great tension. This is a warning shot. And of course, it's illustrated with a photo of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That is, meant to leave no doubt in your mind exactly what happened here, except there is some doubt. South Carolina Representative Jim Clyburn sent a warning shot yesterday, Wednesday, towards a likely incoming freshman who beat one of Clyburn's fellow members of House leadership in a primary, suggesting she may have a long wait before she has a chance at leadership. Well, I mean, I don't know when to stop and comment on this, but this is the gist of things here. Let me continue for a moment. Clyburn, who was the number 3 Democrat in the House of Representatives, directed the comments at, he really did, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He really didn't. The New York candidate who beat Representative Joe Crowley last month in an upset. I would ask her to remember how long I had to wait to get here, Clyburn said on BuzzFeed News' AM to DM on Wednesday morning when asked if Ocasio-Cortez would have to wait for her turn at seniority. Let's not forget the history of all this. I'm going to stop here before I let Clyburn make his, I think, actually quite excellent point that really had almost nothing to do with taking a warning shot, as in my view, at anybody. But here's the thing. One, I don't think there was any kind of warning shot. And 2, the suggestion here is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is somehow trying to cut in line to assume a top leadership position in the House Democratic Caucus before she's even elected. And the thing is, I have seen no indication from her that she has any interest in doing any such thing. She's not declared for any caucus position. She can't. She's not a member of the caucus yet. She's not even indicated any interest. Well, pending my expected victory in November, I will be seeking the House Democratic Caucus whip position. She's named nothing. She's interested in nothing, or she's indicated no interest in anything. The only thing I've seen her say with respect to leadership was, 1, that she was not inclined at this point to support Nancy Pelosi to continue as leader of the Democratic caucus in the House, whether as minority leader or as Speaker of the House, saying that she preferred perhaps, there was time for a new generation of leadership. But she wasn't outright saying, I'll do everything I can to depose her from that spot either. And I have seen her say, well, I don't know who I would support for such a role. I mean, he said, I think at some one point, is Barbara Lee running? That would be awesome. I'd love it. If she were running, I would, I think, like to support her. Well, Barbara Lee has not announced any plans to run for Speaker to challenge Nancy Pelosi for that position. And that's unlikely to happen at any time in the future. But she has announced a bid for, I think, the job that Joe Crowley will now vacate, which I think is the number 4 position. And I don't even remember what that position is now that I recall. But, you know, the top positions being minority leader, minority whip. We've created another position that Clyburn actually now occupies. I think Clyburn's job is assistant minority leader. Crowley, I guess, was probably the caucus chair. At any rate, Barbara Lee was interested in that, and, you know, okay, so what? In other words, Ocasio-Cortez has given no indication either that she is interested in short-circuiting the leadership and joining it herself, even as a freshman, or that she thinks the seniority system is unworthy in any way. I mean, she may actually feel that way, but I don't think she's mentioned it with respect to dealing with leadership. And then, of course, when BuzzFeed News, and in fact, it is, I think, Ben who makes this point in the video, and maybe we can listen to a little bit of it. He says he's the one who suggests, well, wouldn't Ocasio-Cortez have to wait her turn at seniority? And of course she would. Ben here conflates seniority with leadership, with occupying a leadership position. They sometimes go hand in hand, frequently go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. And, you know, seniority, strictly speaking, is not something you can short circuit. You can't fake seniority. You're either there for a number of years or you're not. Leadership is something you can short circuit seniority with. You can be elected to a leadership post and have that happen, though you are less senior than other people who either run against you and lose, or who are voting for you, or who just don't occupy any position. Seniority is a very different thing. But Clyburn also makes a very interesting point, both in the video and this print version of it. He says, let's not forget the history of all of this. And I think that all the folks who have that mentality, and it's not even clear what that mentality is or who has it, and the idea that it's a shot at Ocasio-Cortez gets even more tenuous, given that that's the case. All the folks who have that mentality seem, and the mentality is, I think, now that I think about it, having seen the video, the mentality is that mentality which states as a blanket proposal that all of the Democratic leadership, the current Democratic leadership in the House, ought to be replaced because they're old. That's the premise with which Ben Smith starts all of this, saying, I think, at some point right in the beginning of this segment, that Clyburn has recently celebrated his 70th birthday, to which he offers a somewhat perhaps facetious wish of happy birthday, and then says, that makes you the youngest member of the current House leadership. And don't you think it's time, don't you think that's an indication that it's time that the House leadership step aside and make way for a new generation? And Clyburn is making a couple of points here, one of which is, there's this blanket statement about people being that, the people who are that old having to step aside for a new generation of leaders. And, while it is, on the one hand, ageist, certainly, it also tends to cross the signals. And Clyburn's point was, it's not like I was elected to Congress at the same age. I mean, he didn't say this way, but he could have said, I wasn't elected to Congress at the same age that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez looks to be preparing to be elected at. I haven't been here since I was 30 and spent 40 years in Congress. I was elected much later in life. The fact that I'm 70 tells you how long I've been alive, not how long I've been in Congress. Now, as it happens, he's a pretty well-tenured member of Congress, and he's been around for what I guess is, 26 plus years or so. I mean, he's been in Congress a long time. There's no doubt about it. But like I said, he's not here 40 years and in leadership for 30 of them. He's been in leadership for, it's not like he's spent, 40 years. I guess he's probably been in some level of leadership for about 20 plus years that time. Let's take a quick look just to be sure what we're talking about here. And where's the, let's take a look at maybe his Wikipedia entry, because that'll tell you all about the one when he assumed office as a congressman, plus all of his leadership positions. So he came into Congress as a newly elected member in 1993, and that's some number of years ago. I mean, it's a while. 93, 2003, 2013, it's now 2018, so we're talking about 25 years in Congress. That is a while. But, well, those of you who are, say, of about my age, that is, I say our, like Greg left 15 minutes ago. But if you're as old as we are, 25 years, though it's a significant chunk of time, certainly, it means a great deal less, really. It's regarded very differently than someone who might be, say, 28 years old. It says 25 years of my 28 in life is a pretty significant portion. We're talking about, ancient history. I was 3 years old when you were elected. And that's a different thing, though. If you're 70, 25 years, while it's still a significant chunk of your life, if you think about stuff like at my age, 25 years ago is less time than has passed since I graduated from college, and yet those memories are still relatively fresh. I know it was a long time ago, but you regard it as very differently. If 25 years ago, if you were an adult and out there in the working population, you feel very differently about any number of things. Now, meanwhile, I guess I misheard the birthday wishes, because I'm looking at his personal details here. Mr. Clyburn's 78, not 70. As 78 being the youngest member of the leadership, that, of course, tells you more about the age of the leadership. Clyburn's point was you really need to look at, one, how long I've been here, and two, how long I've been in leadership. He assumed his first top leadership position, with the kind that makes the ranks here when you're putting together people's Wikipedia bios. That is to say, assuming the job of vice chair of the House Democratic Conference in 2003. In other words, he spent, even this grand old master spent 10 years in Congress before moving into leadership. And I guess if anybody thinks that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thinks, and I don't think she thinks this, is going to move into leadership position the day she arrives, well, surprise, it's not likely to happen. That usually doesn't happen. And 10 years before assuming one of these top leadership positions is not unusual at all. Now, along the way, it's not like you spend 10 years in the wilderness, by the way, and the House leadership now, and House leadership always, has been pretty well attuned to all of that. Along the way to a job like vice chair of the House Democratic Conference, you spend time, as a freshman, perhaps lobbying to get, and then hopefully getting rewarded with a plum committee assignment. And then within a couple of terms, you might find yourself chairing a subcommittee. Along the way, you might find yourself joining the ranks of the whip organization, and you'll be a regional whip. You talk to the people from your region of the country and whip votes, and then maybe you'll move up to a deputy whip position, and then perhaps chief deputy whip, and then you might then run for the whip position itself, or chairman of the caucus or the conference. But this is all like 10 and 15 and 20 years down the road. They got little plum assignments that they give you along the way to, make you a part of the chain of command and keep you engaged in all these things. But nobody walks into a leadership position. It just doesn't work that way. You can try, but very often the thing, we've discussed it on the air before, the things that the criteria that people in the conference use to cast their votes, to decide how they're going to cast their votes for leadership positions, it's not something you can manufacture very quickly, because the elections tend not to be ideological in nature. They tend to be about long-term campaign support for other members of the conference. If you are out on the road campaigning for them, if you are raising money either directly for them or for your own leadership PAC and then handing that money out, that's the sort of thing that gets translated into votes for leadership positions. Now, the good news is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is actually doing those things. I don't know whether she's raising money in a leadership PAC or whether she's raising money and passing that around. I think that's probably kind of counter to the sort of approach she wanted to take. But she is barnstorming the country, and really not. I mean, she's made a lot of stops, but only a couple in the grand scheme of things. It's not like she's in every district. And that's been a source of a lot of tension. People are, and I think they are, assuming that she thinks she's assumed a leadership position by going out there and doing this campaign, or they're annoyed that she's campaigning for one or another of the Democratic contenders in still pending primaries, and they support the other person or have reason to believe that the other person should, be getting the majority of the support, and she's decided on this other person. And that is a relatively controversial thing to do, no doubt about it, and it's not very typical of what goes on, but it is, going and campaigning for others outside of your district is precisely the sort of thing that people do to begin to build the sort of goodwill that it takes to support a leadership bid later on. And it is also not the case that she's the only, person who's done this pending their election to their first term. But, for whatever reason, as Greg was discussing earlier, she's become a media star. Part of it has to do with the fact that the media really seems to like this. They really seem to like the narrative of Democrats in disarray. And so they've made her into this national figure. And for her, that's a good thing. I mean, it may be irritating to some other people, particularly those against whom she's, campaigned. But one, she's entitled to do it. And two, that's really the only tool available to her if she really wants to get set up for making a long-term impact once she arrives in Congress. So it's a fairly normal thing to do, and a fairly normal way of doing it, and I can't fault her for it. But again, this I don't even really think that Clyburn is actually upset with her. It's just, I think he's asked a question that's framed to him in a way that's designed to elicit this kind of response, and then the writer of the piece sort of takes off with that and turns it into a warning shot. All he's saying is, hey, nobody should expect that you just even, win your first term in Congress and then suddenly leadership position is handed to you. One, you got to earn that. But I think his first point really was, hey, I haven't been in leadership for 50 years. Even though I'm 78, people will point to that and say, oh, my God, he must have been there forever and have been in leadership forever. And it's simply not the case. And also, another great point, well worth pointing out, is, why did it take me so long to get here? He was, what? Let's see. He's 78. He was born in 1940. And he came to office in 1993. So 40 to 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. He's 53 years old when he finally, or nearly 53 years old when he finally assumes office. And he was making the point that in South Carolina, it simply was the case that much before 1993, there wasn't a great deal of opportunity for very many black politicians to make it to Congress from South Carolina for very particular reasons. And though he was politically active and politically interested when he was as young as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is now. It was not really available to him as an option in what would have been 1968 to simply say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to organize all the Democrats down here in South Carolina and make my way to Congress. It took a considerably longer time for that path to open up for James Clyburn, and that's why he arrived at the age of 53 and then began working towards a long-term goal of making his way into Democratic leadership and trying to steer the political direction of the caucus. And even then, it took him another 10 years. So it wasn't until he was 63 that he even assumes the rank of low-level leadership. When he moves finally to a higher-ranking leadership, chair of the conference, it didn't take him very long. He was vice chair in 2003 and became chair in 2006. But again, at that point, he is 66 years old. So he begins at the top ranks at 66. And now you point to him and say, well, you're 78. That's ancient. It's 12 years. It's a good run. But it's not like he's been there forever. And so between that point and also the larger point, which is it, for very particular reasons, and we know what those reasons are, took a very, very, very long time for black politicians to get elected to Congress in numbers, for them to organize their strength and project it in numbers as they did to greater or lesser success over the years through the Congressional Black Caucus, and then finally to enter the ranks of top leadership in the House Democratic Caucus. That's, all told, not that long of a history of black leadership in the House Democratic Caucus. Now that they are finally enjoying the fruits of those efforts that they spent many years trying to gain, not just fighting their way up the ranks in Congress and trying to gain the seniority and do the things that need to be done in order to get to top leadership posts, but as Clyburn points out very pointedly, spending a lot of time not in Congress, sitting in jail or protesting or sitting under the threat of arrest just to find the opportunity to cast votes for somebody else who was white but maybe sympathetic to their cause to go to Congress on their behalf. It's been a long, long time coming for James Clyburn to spend those last 12 years at the top ranks of Democratic leadership. And although 12 years is a nice run, it's, I'm sure, somewhat galling to be told that it's time for you to step aside because you also happen to be 78. And I think that's a pretty significant point. And I wanted to spend some time on it. I guess at this point, it's not worth, spending any more time by playing the video, but I recommend that you take a look at it. And I don't even really, I would say I don't fault the hosts too much for asking the questions, because the questions are posed rather gently, and they do approach it rather slyly. But what I think is, even if you look at it, I think you still come away with, okay, maybe he's a little bit confused about the difference between seniority and leadership. And maybe they're a little bit overexcited about the fact that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been such a phenomenon. But they don't ask, and they don't ask any questions, nor do they get any answers that are anywhere near as pointed as the headline and subheader that we get that says she's going to have to wait her turn, and that's a warning shot, and it's all about Clyburn's implied anger about her having defeated a friend of his, a fellow member of the House leadership. I don't think Clyburn, I'm sure he misses Crowley. I'm sure they were friendly, I'm sure, but I don't think he views this as any sort of mortal wound to him or any implication that his leadership, his own leadership, is flawed in any way. And I don't know that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thinks so either. But I was astounded at how hard they worked to try to make it look like, wow, Democrats were in disarray. I disagree. And I disagree with this interpretation of the exchange that they had, and I'm I'm only this much shocked. I'm shocked that there's gambling and meme and flaming going on here. All right, well, back to other more important things after this break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. And send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. When we last left off, I think we're pretty much done with this. A couple of nice comments, a couple of further comments that came in here. Let's see. Well, our friend Left Leaning Cock, who just loves to have us read his name on the air, says, thanks for diffusing the BuzzFeed Clyburn comments. Clyburn is very supportive, he says, of the next wave of Democrats, funds and leads an annual mentorship for young leaders. That sounds highly likely. And, I just didn't think it was a real fair shake, although, I also could have shut up about it and it would have gone away and no one would have noticed. But I don't know. I think that this sort of stuff stacks up. Oh, you know what? Look, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it wouldn't have gone away. Let's see. Former a Daily Kos alum here, Scott Woolidge, tweeting, Democrats already eating their young in the press. This is no way to nurture fresh new party talent, Representative Clyburn. This tells the young generation of the old guard can only be retired by force. And guess what he's looking at? He's looking at the very same article that we just dissected. And let's see, he is responded to by shall I even bother trying to say this name? Gene or John? I can't say which. Willingly Mana. That's my best guess at what is presented here as the last name. I think it's clear at this point that the old guard needs to be and will be retired by force. Clyburn, she says this, and this is rather audacious. He's lecturing Jim Clyburn here. She waited 28 years for her time. She's 28 years old. She hasn't waited anything. I mean, if at best she began voting at age 18. She may have been very interested in voting before then, and lots of people are. But the idea that she waited 28 years, he waited too, and he waited even longer than that. I think this is a very serious misunderstanding of what happened here. I can't respond in real time, however, but I will set this one aside and try and jump in there and clear that up, although I have a feeling that perhaps, honestly, it's a waste of time at this point. But maybe they'll listen along to the podcast later. Mighty OCD, I didn't mean to go this far. Okay, now I want Jim Clyburn for speaker, but I'm sure it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But I don't think he has designs on that just yet. And let's see, Ricky from up in PEI, Ricky the Canuckistani, says, I think if any incumbents are spouting off about Ocasio-Cortez, now be careful here, I don't know that they're doing that, it's because they feel threatened by her and BuzzFeed is trying to make money off of that. Now, I do think BuzzFeed is trying to make money off of that, no doubt about it. The problem is that I think what I was hoping my analysis of it would demonstrate is that I don't think Clyburn is spouting off about anybody, Ocasio-Cortez or otherwise. I think they're just very interested in making it look like that's the case. And it just doesn't seem to be the case from my perspective. But yeah, I'm worried that, you know what, if I go and try and put out the fire that Scott Woolidge is worried about here, I think I have a fairly good chance of putting out that fire with Scott, maybe with Jean here as well, if we discuss things directly. But there'll be 100,000 other such fires to put out, none of whom will see the comments or the discussion. So in some sense, it's a waste of time, or at least it would be a better spent by someone else, let's say, than me. I'd like to get to other pieces of news, as much as I'd like to continue with that one and have that discussion live and on the air. Let's see. Where should we go with it? Many other things on the plate, potentially. I had like some idea of where I would go after this one, but now I see so many other things happen. There was another comment or question Mighty OCD had posed, actually, asking, has a DOJ official, Department of Justice official, ever been impeached? Question related to the Rod Rosenstein impeachment proposition. I don't think so, but I'm not positive. Certainly not in modern times. Someone was pointing out the other day that this is, or would be, the first impeachment, if it were to actually get any traction and be debated. It would represent the first impeachment of an executive department official other than the president in quite some time. I would say basically all of modern political practice. There have been executive branch officials impeached, other than the president, impeached before, but, it's been like 100 plus years that they've happened. And yes, Ricky, I think we gave you enough clearance here, but yes, she's chiming in here, by the way, to say about the Ocasio-Cortez Clyburn situation. That's why I said if, and it's, yeah, that's the wiggle room you needed. I don't think they're actually doing that. I think Crowley set the bar for that, and he was pretty gracious, at least in some respects, although I see that lots of people are questioning whether or not that's his true feeling, because apparently he's still got a ballot line for the Working Families Party, and there's some question about whether or not it's up to him to vacate that ballot line, or whether that's really such an easy thing with New York election law being sometimes crazy. I'm not clear on what the answer is there. But in public, when making comments about it, he's been fairly gracious about things. And I doubt then, therefore, that I doubt very much that the rest of the Democratic leadership would want to hang their hat on criticizing her because she beat someone they knew and worked with in leadership. Sometimes there's a lot of tension between people in leadership, and they very often secretly have knives out for one another because they want to move into each other's jobs, or they've been frustrated in some purpose by the other one in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't a great deal of what was I going to say? I got distracted by another story. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if there aren't a lot of members of the Democratic leadership who don't, particularly care about the fact that Crowley's gone. So, they might have been supporters and they were sad about it, but that's life, and I don't think it's really occupying much of their time, I guess is what I would say. All right. I know that led me then to another story just because it involved the DOJ, and I wanted to at least make note of this, if not read, necessarily the entire article, but this is an interesting headline. It's in The Atlantic. It is Natasha Bertrand bringing up an important point, which I think I want to file now towards the end of the week and see if anything comes of it. Unanswered questions, she says, trail a Trump DOJ official with, you'll never believe it, a Russia tie. They all have Russia ties, obviously. But those of you who have been listening to the show for a long time and have listened to us put some of these stories on file and make notes and make dots on our chart and have been waiting for a chance to connect them, you can pull out your notes on this one. Brian Benkowski, Bencz, Kowski, Brian Benkowski, Trump's appointee to run the Justice Department's criminal division, and you can guess what they do at the criminal division. In the Trump administration, that's where you put all the criminals. He runs the department's criminal division, and you probably, I don't know, if you're a genius, ding, said Brian Benkowski, isn't that the guy who, if you're like me, you got to wait for the explicit reading of it, represented Russia's Alfa Bank? Well, yes, it is. That's the purpose of putting those words here in the subheader. Brian Benkowski, Trump's appointee to run the Justice Department's criminal division, represented Russia's Alfa Bank. Senate Democrats have questions about recusal. So here's the situation and the setup. Basically what happened was, we knew this, and that's why it rings a bell. It came up during his hearings, and basically it was it wasn't like that kind of thing. And now later on, as facts develop, you remember, hey, wait a minute. And then you realize, the DOJ's criminal division could handle a lot of different kinds of cases that grow out of either the Mueller investigation or the various other side investigations that have developed that have caught up figures closely related, but that haven't come straight out of the Mueller investigation. On October 31st, 2016, this story begins. Just 8 days before the presidential election, my colleague Franklin Foer reported that computer servers for Russia's biggest private bank, remember this? This is how we came to know of Alfa Bank, appeared to have been pinging servers registered to the Trump Organization during the election, raising questions about potential collusion. That story mostly went away, got mostly debunked. Oh, it could have been this, it could have been that. But I guess it's back. The Trump campaign, the Trump Organization, and Alfa Bank all issued denials in response, and Alfa, in March 2017, hired the attorney Brian Benkowski, a partner at Kirkland & Ellis, big firm, Kirkland & Ellis, but that name got called probably yesterday. I think we were reviewing, wasn't it? I guess Brett Kavanaugh spent some time there. Anyway, lots of people do. It's a big place. Anyway, he had just months earlier headed the Trump administration's transition team at the Justice Department. Questions about the pinging servers have never fully been resolved, and Foer has subsequently written about the various competing theories. 2 weeks ago, though, as all eyes were on Donald Trump's European tour and his impending meeting with Vladimir Putin, Benkowski was narrowly confirmed, at last, by the Senate to lead the Justice Department's criminal division, even though the Senate Judiciary Committee lacked key information at the time, both about Alfa Bank and about Benkowski, before it decided to move ahead with a vote, according to a letter Democratic Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois previously sent to the Justice Department, and a forthcoming letter to Justice written by Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island and signed by 13 other Senate Democrats. Benkowski served as Jeff Sessions' lead staffer, suspiciously enough, while he was the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and worked in previous administrations as Chief of Staff for the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General. Just prior to his nomination to head the criminal division, Benkowski worked on white-collar criminal defense cases at Kirkland & Ellis, but the fact that he has never been a prosecutor has raised questions about his qualifications to oversee the government's criminal investigations, including the probe by special counsel Robert Mueller. It's a question. It's not disqualifying by itself. Benkowski's confirmation at the height of Mueller's investigation into Russia's election interference potential coordination between the Trump campaign and Moscow has exacerbated fears among Democrats that the probe will be inappropriately influenced and that Benkowski could funnel information about the Russia probe to Attorney General Sessions, who is supposed to be recused from that investigation. The biggest outstanding issues raised by the Democrats: whether Alfa Bank is or ever has been the subject of federal criminal investigation into which Benkowski would have visibility, whether he will pledge to recuse himself from all matters related to Alfa Bank's parent company, Alpha Group, and whether he will recuse himself from all matters related to the special counsel's investigation. After all, we all know that Jeff Sessions supposedly felt he had to recuse himself from that because of the role he played in the Trump campaign, and Benkowski was playing a similar role. He was involved in the campaign, involved in the transition, and was working for Sessions the whole time anyway, who himself was so intimately involved that he felt he had to recuse himself. So he too ought to be recusing himself, and apparently has not said that he would, not definitively. Dick Durbin, who sits on the Judiciary Committee, sent Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, back in the news again, a letter in September of 2017 raising concerns over Benkowski's nomination and asking whether Alpha Bank is currently under investigation. DOJ wouldn't say, by the way. He says, look, I've been trying to get an answer on that. Can't get it. I have asked, is Alpha Bank currently or has they ever been the subject of a federal criminal investigation? And what is the intelligence community's assessment of the reported computer server contacts between Alpha Bank and the Trump Organization during the campaign? Written response a few weeks later, Rosenstein declined to confirm or deny whether Alpha is currently under investigation. That's DOJ policy. And Benkowski's inescapable... I guess he would also... Did he say he would refuse to confirm or deny whether Benkowski ought to recuse? Well, anyway, point here is rather than spend time on the balance of it or retelling the story of Alpha Bank and Alpha Group, just that it has cropped up on the radar again, and now this time it pops up with Benkowski firmly ensconced, I guess, at the Department of Justice. So something to keep an eye on, and you'll perhaps one day be glad we brought it up. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. All right. Other issues that perhaps merit some mention in the closing minutes of the show. Oh, I should go back to, or maybe since I already handed out the link on it, it's not, maybe you all read it, but I'll remind you of Dan Frumkin's look at the Brett Kavanaugh nomination, and that Congress, if they were fulfilling the roles originally ascribed to them by the founders, would have no business confirming a fifth vote to the Supreme Court that would undermine their power vis-a-vis the executive. The executive needs no more help in expanding its power versus the legislative branch, and having the judicial branch do it for you might just be suicide at this point. All right, let's see. I note for the record anyway that for some reason, and I didn't get to read it because Josh Marshall put this in the Prime section, the subscription only section of Talking Points memo, but he brought up on Twitter yesterday, and Greg brought to my attention. Interesting. I'm not certain why this came back into the news, but he reminded us all that of the story of the recorded conversation between Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan, and other Republican leaders from way back when in the summer of 2016. The recorded conversation about them, talking about, of course, the most famous line that came out of it, McCarthy saying that he thought Dana Rohrabacher and Donald Trump were both on the Putin payroll, and then Ryan says, haha, big joke, let's all swear ourselves to secrecy here because we're a family. And Josh Marshall was tweeting out his Prime story here. Just before telling colleagues he believed Putin paid bribes to Donald Trump, Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy sat down for a meeting with the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Now, because it's a Prime article, I wasn't able to tell why he thought that was particularly interesting. I mean, I know why I think it's interesting. I guess I don't know why it was brought back up now. But, of course, I wanted to use the opportunity of his having brought it back up into the public consciousness to remind everybody that we learned a long time ago when they finally released those transcripts, and they made a very big deal out of them, but there was never, I don't think, enough attention being paid to the fact that those transcripts, the transcript of that recorded conversation, made plain well, what Josh hints at here. In other words, that McCarthy's approach to the whole thing is rather startling, in that he now has, switched positions and now thinks that none of it is a big deal and we have to cover it all up anyway, which is where the rest of his leadership was at that time. But the fact that he had just come from a meeting with the Ukrainians, and many of them had had similar meetings or were at the same meeting with McCarthy, the biggest part of that taped conversation is McCarthy describing, along with some others, accurately and with great incredulity, and it's agreed to by the rest of the parties of the conversation, describing the Russian program of interference with foreign elections and manipulating foreign elections, not only through, computer interference, but also with aggressive programs of fake news type propaganda. And they're all terribly concerned about it and call it, I think even Ryan agrees that they're looking for a word to describe it. Ryan's word for it is it's maniacal. And it's not entirely clear whether they express an understanding that that the United States too might be vulnerable to just such an attack. But it is clear that they know that it is a Russian habit and that it extends beyond Ukraine, and that it is a frequent problem that the Russians were interfering in Western democratic elections. And at some point, though, Ryan, for whatever reason, because he's such a wonk and he's such a serious guy, says, yeah, well, you know who the only people taking a strong stance against this Russian aggression and Russian interference is? It's us. We're the only ones doing something about it. And they stop him and they correct him. And it's not just McCarthy. And I can't remember exactly who else it is. We should review the transcripts to remind ourselves who's there. But they say that's the problem, is we're not doing anything about that. That's not happening. The United States really isn't standing up and doing anything about it. And as a matter of fact, this is all concurrent with the United States being asked to do more by President Obama and Mitch McConnell standing in the way and saying no, and I will make a political problem out of this for you. I will accuse you of partisanship if you try to do what it is that Paul Ryan, for whatever reason, seems convinced we actually are doing, but the rest of the people in the conversation know very well that we are not. It's really rather amazing. And I don't know how it got back in the news, but I wish I did know, because it deserves more attention and more time and more thought. So I brought it back up again myself instead. All right, let's see. Other items that we might perhaps spend some time on. Yes, you know what? I want to get to this one, and this is good for the closing minutes of the show. We've been puzzling for, I guess a couple of days now about just why this tape of Trump and Michael Cohen would have come to light in the way that it did. We learned a couple of days ago of the existence of the tape, which I'm sure we all assumed existed in some form, although I must say I was surprised that it was taped in person and not over the phone. And it's not clear to me, I don't know if I have seen discussed anywhere the question of whether or not Trump knew that this taping was going on. But Michael Cohen tapes him with what sounds like, a recording device, that he has got in his pocket, although it's not muffled either. It's almost like he's wearing a lapel mic. I am curious about whether or not this was purportedly secretly taped or not, and what it might mean either way. But at any rate, we were questioning, look, how did this come to our attention? And the answer we got fairly shortly thereafter, which was a bit of a blockbuster, but it got bypassed by, or overwhelmed by a number of other blockbusters, was that the Trump legal team had waived the claimed attorney-client privilege for that tape. And which would, of course, mean that it would be admissible as evidence in any case that was brought against Cohen by whomever. And I guess we're supposed to remember, isn't the Michael Cohen case actually a Southern District of New York case and not a Mueller case? But anyway, we recall that this storyline started with the raid on Cohen's home, office, and hotel room, and I'm still puzzled by the hotel room. And I think that probably came from. I think Michael Cohen originally thought that by having a hotel room, although it seems like he was living there, and I don't know why live there instead of his home, which was also in New York, in Manhattan. But I was wondering whether maybe he rented a hotel room and kept things there that he hoped would not fall into the FBI's hand should the FBI ever raid his home and office, and they're like, oh, they won't know I have a hotel room. But then he was living there, so that defeated that purpose. But then again, remember, this is the dummy who wouldn't start new LLCs to handle different pieces of business, even though that's the very purpose of LLCs. Anyway, they waived the privilege, and no one could figure out exactly why they did that. And then on top of it, the story progressed once we got a hold of the actual audio when Michael Cohen's legal representation, which is amazingly Lanny Davis, when they decided to release it. Once, I guess, the Trump team decided to waive their privilege with it, the Cohen team decided they might as well put the audio out there and waive their own interest in the privacy of that tape. But no one could understand why they did it. And of course, Rudy Giuliani was out there saying, oh yeah, well, it's exculpatory. And I don't know what else he had to say. I mean, that's baloney, but it is the only thing he could possibly do. At this point, the only thing you can do is lie your ass off. So I might as well just say it's exculpatory. And some portion of America will believe that because I said it. The rest of us will laugh at me, but what can I do? I got nothing else. Well, finally, circulating yesterday, and I'm sure this occurred to a lot of you, but for some reason, psychological reasons, I think, this did not occur to me. Nick Ramsey, MSNBC producer, circulating this clip of Chris Hayes interviewing who? Daniel Goldman. Daniel Goldman, an NBC News legal analyst, on the show, and he basically puts the question to him, look, I've been confused for days, and lots of people have. Why in the world would they waive privilege with respect to this thing? And we were reminded by Goldman that, yeah, all of this evidence that was seized from his house and his office and his hotel room, remember that there was a special master appointed, the job of whom was to review all the claims of attorney-client privilege that were being made with respect to everything that was seized. At that point, Cohen was still on Team Trump, and he said, you can't use any of this stuff as evidence against me or my boss or anybody because it's privileged information. I am Donald Trump's attorney. He is my client. The attorney-client privilege protects these things. The special master was going to go piece by piece by piece and say, you're right or you're wrong. You are protected by the privilege with this piece or not with this piece or whatever. And so one of the outcomes along the way, they're doing it bit by bit, not all one blanket decision. This piece of evidence is protected. This piece of evidence will not be protected, etc. And it was Goldman's supposition that this tape, because this tape basically, as Greg has told you, not only has evidence of the fact that he lied about having knowledge of the payoff, but because he lied about having no knowledge of the payoff and fraudulently led the public to believe that and fraudulently paid the money, and of course the bigger issue, I guess from the legal perspective, possibly perpetrated a campaign finance law violation, a crime against campaign finance law, and then sought to try and bury both the story and the crime against campaign finance law. Very likely, this would eventually have been admitted as evidence as an exception to the attorney-client privilege, a crime-fraud exception. That is, in other words, if you conspire to commit a crime with your attorney, that's not a privileged attorney-client conversation. That's evidence of a crime, and it deserves to be brought into court as evidence against you. However, as he rightly points out, it would have been catastrophic for the Trump team to have a special master rule, not only that this was admissible as evidence, but to announce to the world the reason it's available as evidence is because it falls under the crime fraud exception. It's a crime, it's a fraud, and it's on tape. Rather than wait for that decision to be made and announced, they may then have preemptively released it.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
That's right. So I thought it was a very interesting observation and probably likely true. And it was just sort of a testament to the psychology of all this. We're just still not in the mode, even after all this time, of assuming that the president is really and truly guilty of crimes and fraud and cover-up and not thinking about what he needs to do to try and diffuse that. Amazing.